at the end. For anybody in the audience that doesn't know, we have a prize giveaway at the end, and we are going to be, Christy is going to be asking a question. Christy, is it going to be based on the presentation so that everybody has to pay attention?
It is going to be based on the presentation.
All right, so everybody take notes. We've got a giveaway tonight.
Right?
and I will say that at our last meeting, we had a challenge. If someone could come up with some particular data based on that I had been looking for afterwards, and the person did, and I said, if someone came up with that data, I'd send them one of our mugs, and they did, and I did, and they loved it, and it's all awesome. So, Christy, all yours.
Awesome, thanks. I'm gonna share my screen. All right.
All right, we can see your screen.
Oh, perfect. And I finally fixed the issue, so it's going right to my correct monitor this time for this talk. So super excited about that. So thanks for having me tonight. My name's Christy. I'm a senior software engineer at Liberty Mutual. Today, we're going to be talking about how to enable serverless golden paths with AWS SAM. For those that don't know, this is Sam the squirrel, and he is the AWS SAM mascot. So definitely felt like he needed to be included here today. So I got a little bit of an agenda. I'll do a quick introduction about our company, myself, and because it is International Women's Day and Women's History Month, there's some whole diversity and inclusion efforts that I kind of wanted to highlight, and some work with women who code. I'm going to talk a little bit about the current serverless state at Liberty Mutual. I know this is an AWS user group, so chances are high that most of you have heard about SAM or have used SAM. But in case you have not, I will do like a 5-10 minute overview on what exactly SAM is. We're going to go into some SAM pattern development work that has been going on at Liberty Mutual. I will talk a little bit about best practices, and kind of rolled up in that is some enabling constraints work and well-architected reviews. And then I'll just wrap up with the future of SAM at Liberty, and I'll leave some time for some question and answers, hopefully. And I'll try to pay attention to the chat, but I'm not great at it when I'm talking. So
that's our job. We'll take care of that.
Yeah, you guys cut me off. I was just gonna say that. So a little bit about us. We're an insurance company that exists to help people embrace today and confidently pursue tomorrow. And we do that by promising protection for the unexpected, delivered with care. We have about 45,000 employees across the globe, and about 5,000 of those are in technical roles. We're number 71 on the Fortune 100 list, and we're also the 6th largest global property and casualty insurer. So some cool stats here for 2021, and also actually for this year, we've been voted one of the best places to work in IT. And along with the theme of diversity and inclusion, Forbes magazine has voted us the best employers for diversity, women, and new grads in 2021. And I know we've also achieved the perfect score of 100 across the last 4 years for the Corporate Equality Index. And we've been voted one of the best places to work for LGBTQ equality in 2021 as well. So I want to just take a second to highlight some of the great work we've been doing in women in technology. So we do have a women in tech group that I've been pretty involved with for the past couple of years. Two of the kind of substreams or efforts that we've had going on in the women in tech space. The first is called LEGIT, and it's actually an acronym. It stands for Liberty Encouraging Girls in Technology. We've been around for about 7 years now, and our goal is really to help promote the STEM fields with girls in the K through 12 range. I know pre-pandemic numbers, we had over 350 Liberty volunteers teaching to over 12,000 students. And we've continued to keep this going as much as we can during the virtual world here. I myself have been involved in this group. I'm actually one of the founding members of the Boston Legit group. And I've currently transitioned over to leading some of our external branding and communications. So doing things like this and talking about Legit externally. as well as working on putting together some good materials and partnering with our social media teams to spread some awareness. One of the other great things we do every year is a Women in Tech Summit for freshmen and sophomore women in college. They typically come to our campus for like a 3-day tech summit, and we talk all about gender and equality, and just build up that support system and encourage folks to keep going through the STEM field. So we have about 65 members of our WIT group that volunteer to mentor these students throughout their fall semester. And typically a lot of these students turn into interns and full-time hires here, so that partnership and engagement even continues further. So these are some of the great things that we're doing. Those are just two of many. So this is not a pitch, but if you do want some more information, you can check us out at lmi.co/tech. If you're one of the people that keeps pinging Chris and he doesn't answer you on Meetup, you can also reach out to me if you're interested in working for us, because we are always hiring. Yeah, definitely feel free to check it out.
That is so awesome. I will withdraw my comments about your commercials. That's amazing.
Great, perfect. That's what I'm here to do. So, so a little bit more about me. As I mentioned, a senior software engineer here at Liberty. For the last 2 years or so, I've been working specifically in our serverless DevOps and enablement group. I've been with the company for a total of 4 years plus a 1-year-long internship, and I've done a couple different things throughout that time, lots of Java and microservices. But I started with cloud development a couple of years ago and kind of never looked back. Super excited to say that I've just been included in this round of community builders. So I'll be part of the serverless cohort. So I'm super excited to build some stuff and get a little bit more ingrained in the AWS community over the next 12 months. My undergraduate degree is from Roger Williams University in Rhode Island, and it's in computer engineering. I recently wrapped up a master's degree in electrical and computer engineering, where I focused on cloud computing, AI and machine learning, some IoT, some data analytics, and that was from Boston University this past, now a year ago, January, which I obtained while working full-time throughout the pandemic. So I was super bored and just got my degree to use the time effectively. I did live in Boston for 4 years, but about 1.5 years ago, I moved out to Boulder, Colorado. I just love being outside. So I hike, I ski, I mountain bike, all that fun stuff. And I am also affiliated with the Women Who Code Denver and Boulder group out here. So we do monthly tech meetups, very similar to this one. And we have a bunch of different talks, and I'm also putting together a lot of social media content for us over there. So I want to talk a little bit about our serverless state before I jump into things that are SAM specific. So some of you may have heard or may know, we're kind of well known for having a centralized sort of marketplace or developer catalog where we can surface starter patterns and help our developers get started and deployed out in the cloud on day one. So part of this marketplace and this catalog has really led to a rapid adoption of serverless developers and the start of a pretty robust serverless community. I actually checked this past week, and we currently have 67,000 Lambda functions and about 5,000 API gateways running across a couple hundred AWS accounts. So we're pretty mature in this space. I think we still have a long way to go, but there's a lot of experimentation. There's a lot of serverless, and there's a lot of AWS work going on in our space. As some of you may know, this has led to some external recognition. We were actually on stage at reInvent this past year as part of Warner Vogel's keynote, talking about some of this community adoption and the centralized marketplace and patterns. So we're definitely getting some external recognition, and I like to think that I know what I'm doing and we know what we're doing, but still definitely growing and maturing in this space. So who is this SAM that I keep talking about? I keep bringing it up a couple times. For those that don't know, SAM stands for the Serverless Application Model, and I've included Sam the Squirrel here again. This is just an open source framework that AWS owns and maintains for you. It defines your cloud resources with YAML. And I like to think of it as a bit of an extension off of CloudFormation. So for those that are familiar with CloudFormation, SAM integrates pretty nicely with it. You can use serverless resources with SAM alongside of your CloudFormation resources as well. The kind of main differentiator is the property type becomes a serverless property type, which I'll show an example of and kind of get into a little bit. Some of the great benefits of using SAM is it bakes in some best practices for you. You're able to locally run, test, build, and debug. And it integrates pretty nicely with some of the AWS tools such as code build, code deploy, code pipeline. And because it's an open source framework, it is free to use.
We do have a question in the chat asking about
Sure.
serverless.com, which you may well be getting to later on or not.
Sure. Yeah, I can kind of address that. So we, as a member of the serverless enablement team, we support any sort of serverless development that we're doing. I will say our largest footprint is AWS space. That's just where we're most mature, where most of the support is. However, we do have plans to eventually kind of, once we get a little bit more up and running with like Azure and Google Cloud, there's the potential for supporting serverless there. And we have folks that are making use of the serverless framework. Just the footprint's much smaller. So the community model really helps with that. There's a lot of knowledge sharing and kind of reuse across our community channels for that. But I would say most of my work and most of our focus on the DevOps enablement team is in the AWS space right now. Cool. Okay, so kind of moving on here, I just pulled up some really basic hello world out of the box examples of a CloudFormation function versus setting up a function in SAM. They look really similar. You can also, add a lot more properties to these as you want. I just wanted to pull up something a little simplistic to look at here. The main thing you'll notice is the type is different. So under the CloudFormation example, you'll see that your Lambda function is defined as an AWS Lambda function, whereas under the SAM example, you're actually using that AWS serverless function instead. So these are just examples I pulled off of and credited to the GitHub repos if you're curious. So what do we use SAM for? Most obvious one is to build serverless applications. One of the things that we're working pretty hard to do is kind of to change this mindset around serverless and what it is and what it means. I think in the past, a lot of folks kind of associate serverless with a Lambda function. And we're trying to kind of change that mindset. So it's not, if you just throw a Lambda function on your project, does not mean you're serverless all of a sudden, doesn't mean you're building serverless applications. So we want to shift this mindset to be more about an event-driven architecture, which uses event triggers and communicates between decoupled services. And it kind of follows a change in state rather than just a service it's associated with. So that's kind of something that we're trying to reframe a little bit, and SAM is definitely a tool that helps us out with that. As I showed on the other slide, SAM has serverless functions. Another resource is a serverless API, or you can also do a serverless HTTP API. And there are serverless simple tables as well, which are Dynamo tables. And there's a couple other resources out there, like I think State Machines is another one. But the documentation covers a lot of that. This last point, I want to be clear, I'm not saying that YAML is better than code. I'm just saying that for folks that prefer to use configuration languages like YAML or JSON, SAM is really great for utilizing YAML instead of doing a Python or a TypeScript project. So that's something that's pro or con depending on the type of developer you are, but it does make it easy for folks to get up and running with serverless and with the cloud without having to know a programming language right off the bat. Another cool feature about SAM is that it has its own command line interface. I just called out a couple of the really popular commands that I've used and that are pretty popular with the SAM CLI. There are more of them out there. I didn't think we need to go through all of them. SAM init is a way to initialize a new project. So you can pass it in your language of choice, and then you can pass in a template you want to use. So AWS provides a lot of standardized templates. The Hello World one's a pretty popular one, and as part of those examples I showed previously. So this will get you up and running with a project structure. You can do SAM build, which is exactly how it sounds. You build your project locally. You can do a SAM local invoke, which is useful for both functions and API gateways, and can kind of build it and help you mock and test your services locally. SAM deploy will deploy your project via the command line. SAM validate just validates that your template structure is appropriate and good to go. This last one is actually part of something that was announced kind of around reInvent, but SAM Accelerate is a new feature of SAM. One that I have not had a chance to explore yet myself, but I've heard some really great things about it. And one of the cool pieces of it is it comes with a new SAM command, which is SAM sync. And that actually runs your SAM build and deploy for you and skips over the traditional CloudFormation chain set process that happens in the background. So I just wanted to show a sample like SAM project that you get from SAM init really quickly, because this will kind of help understand a little bit of how we do things at Liberty Mutual and how it might be a little different from this. So on the left is just a project structure that you get out of the box. So kind of the key components of this is that Hello World folder contains a app.py, which is your Python Lambda function. And then all your infrastructure code goes in that template.yaml file. And then I took a screenshot of what that template.yaml file gives you, which again is just this very basic, very simple serverless function. So this is completely out of the box, just kind of helps you get started, gets you up and running with a SAM project pretty quickly, right out of the box. So I could probably take an entire hour to talk about SAM and all its different features and all the great things about it. But I do want to get into how we are using SAM at Liberty Mutual and some of the work we're doing with it. So kind of with that being said, these are some of the resources that I've used or things that I point our developers to that have been really helpful. So the AWS documentation is obviously a great place to start. The online tech talks on YouTube, a lot of those contain like the reInvent talks and some deep dives. I really like the ones that Eric Johnson and Chris Munn's put out there. Serverless Land will give you some good ones for blog posts and some deep dives. And obviously, as mentioned, this tool is open source, so you can check out the SAM code on GitHub. And I do have links for all of these, which I will share at the end if needed as well. So we talked a little bit about SAM, what SAM is. So how are we utilizing SAM at Liberty Mutual to create kind of golden paths for our developers? So I've talked about some of the target usages for SAM that comes from AWS, but kind of in practice, who at Liberty Mutual is really using SAM? Like who are our developers that we're kind of targeting that we're seeing pick this up? The first one is cloud beginners. I tend to point a lot of folks to the SAM tool if they're just starting out. This is kind of a controversial topic, I could say, but I am kind of more in the camp that I found that folks that jump right into CDK have a better time with it when they have a basic level understanding of CloudFormation templates. And I think that YAML is a really good kind of middle ground for that. We do leave it completely up to the developer and enable all three of those tools. So it is totally up to them. But folks that are just getting started and are trying to shift their mindset into this event-driven architecture, I found SAM as a really good medium to use, especially without the command line tools. It's a great kind of starting point. Obviously, our serverless developers will use SAM as well. Again, total preference to the developer of what kind of tool they want to use. We allow and enable any of them. And then we do kind of find that those folks tend to be YAML users. We do have a lot of developers that have retooled or gone through boot camps or this and that. Maybe they have a background as a network admin or a DBA or an infrastructure engineer, and they're just more comfortable using things like JSON and YAML. So this is a great target audience for those that want to dive into serverless, but maybe aren't the strongest in a coding language. So this is all great. We talked about how awesome it is to do AWS like a SAM init right out of the box. You get all set up. So why do we need to do specific things at Liberty then? Like, why can't we just use this and like be good to go? And it's kind of a trick question because you can do that, but it's just not as easy as it could be. So at an enterprise as large as ours, and trying to push this serverless first initiative so that developers are embracing a serverless application mindset, it is really difficult to kind of get everyone on the same page and to promote best practices across the board, to promote reuse. And we have a lot of different kind of restrictions and things that are internal to our company that we need to adhere to, that SAM init out of the box initialization doesn't actually allow for. So it's great that SAM can integrate with things like AWS code build and pipeline and deploy. Those aren't the CI/CD tools that we use though. And we need an easy way for you to be set up with our CI/CD tools, our security checks, and all those other things. So you definitely can create a hello world out of the box and add all those things to it. It's just a lot of steps that we can reuse and kind of automate for our developers. So how do we do this? I talked a little at the beginning about our centralized marketplace and our developer catalog. So this is meant to be like a one-stop shop for our developers to come in and be able to be out in the cloud, be serverless day one. So this has everything, ideally has everything that they need, has different patterns. And this is everything from cloud and serverless development to other platforms and things too. It's not just specific to cloud and serverless. The idea is that these are community sourced patterns. So my team owns a couple, and I'll talk a little bit about that. But we want the community to come together and really promote and say, hey, like, I have a use case for SAM. I think other people have a use case for SAM. So I'm going to put this pattern together and bake in all the kind of Liberty specific things that we need to run this here and surface it to our community so that we don't have to waste time and have everybody do the same steps over and over again. And this really promotes reuse and cross-team collaboration. This way, we don't have to keep reinventing the wheel, and we don't have to take the developer time to do that. And everybody kind of has an understanding of what's happening, and we can share across our organization and our teams. So we have a little bit of consistency, but we're still promoting and enabling for all different tools. So I wanted to go into a little bit of what this looks like to contribute to a marketplace like this. The first kind of question somebody would ask is, hey, is this going to benefit someone else? Like I said, I'm using SAM. I think that it would be great for other people to use SAM or even CDK or another tool. I think that this architecture, this pattern, this thing that we're doing could be repeatable across the organization. Then you would go into the portal and kind of see, like, if something like this already exists, has someone created this? And if they haven't, then you go and engage with that platform team. So we do have a team that owns this marketplace, this developer catalog. They own the front end. They own like a whole contribution model to help you surface your pattern that way. So you don't have to worry about that infrastructure. And then the developer or the team would develop their pattern and work with them with the contribution model. And then from there, it's surfaced to all the other developers. And the only thing that you have to do is own and maintain your pattern going forward, which is not, as a team that owns patterns, it's not a huge headache. It's really just kind of keeping up to date on some of your versions and just keeping an eye out if there's, security vulnerabilities or patches or things as they come up. So to talk specifically about SAM, my team actually owns the SAM, what we call skeleton offering. So it's really bare bones, kind of is meant to mimic that SAM init with the hello world template. We chose to give our developers a Python Lambda out of the box. And then Python actually has this really cool tool called Cookie Cutter. And it allows us to take the input from the user and utilize hooks to kind of dynamically generate the template specific to the user, which I'll go into a little bit more in the next slide. With us offering the skeleton offering, it's set up directly with our CI/CD tools, so developers don't need to worry about the pipelines. It also is integrated with our security checks as well. As I was putting these slides together, it's kind of funny. I went out to our marketplace to see if there were other SAM patterns, and turns out we're still the only one, which is cool. But you know, we're up to, I think, about 100 different instances of this being repeated. So you know, across 5,000, maybe that's not a ton, but the fact that this is being repeated over 100 times means that there's definitely some value, and we've definitely saved our developers some time with this setup process. So this is pretty simplistically what it looks like. So on the left-hand side are all the questions that we ask. So what's your project name? Do you want that CI/CD pipeline? And then we kind of ask some really specific things to your project. So we allow for X-ray tracing on your Lambda function if you want it. We ask you if you want an API gateway. And then we ask if there's a storage solution that you want to use, such as S3 or Dynamo, or you don't have to include any. And this is where the cookie cutter tool comes in and is really useful. So we actually have a set of conditional logic in our starter pattern template that dynamically takes this user input and says, you know, hey, they asked for a Dynamo table. So you'll see on that top code snippet, you'll get that if you said yes. So you'll get the serverless simple table, which is SAM's equivalent of Dynamo. And you'll get some of these fields. Obviously, I can't include everything because there's some proprietary information. This is kind of pretty standard out of the box, and you can add other properties as you need to. Similarly, if you say yes to an S3 bucket, you'll get this S3 bucket configuration. And you'll notice that there isn't a SAM equivalent for S3. It's just an S3 bucket. So this is also a good example of where you can use regular CloudFormation mixed in with your SAM serverless resources. This is kind of, I want to talk a little bit about our best practices. I know the slide kind of seems like it's negative. Constraints and WAR. WAR actually stands for well-architected reviews. So I want to talk a little bit first about how we enable constraints with SAM. So we kind of have to be careful of walking this fine line of, we want to encourage our developers to still be innovative and to still experiment and to bring tools and things that they want us to enable and support. But we also don't want it to be a complete free-for-all where people are just pushing whatever they want and we're not paying attention to best practices and we're different across the entire organization. So we've kind of come to a little bit of a middle ground here with enabling some constraints and putting up some guardrails, but not trying to be too restrictive to our developers. The first of that is a series of security rules or checks that we run. It's with an application that we call Radar. My team also contributes some of these Radar rules that are specific to serverless. So it could be like making sure resources are tagged appropriately. It could be checking to make sure you're not on an old version of something. Just anything and everything that could be a potential security risk or vulnerability for us as an insurance company, because we deal with a lot of sensitive data and things like that. The second part of this too is, so our AWS console is completely locked down for read-only access, except for in like 1 or 2 accounts for, I would say 90% of our developers. So we are really forced into using IAC tools, and SAM is a great solution for this, which is why SAM, CDK, and CFTs are a really popular solution for us. And finally, for our CI/CD pipelines, we configure those as code in a library called pipeline patterns. And that is where we take advantage of these SAM commands, the SAM build, the SAM deploy, because we can bake those into our code configuration. And that in turn becomes part of that skeleton pattern that folks can get right out of the box and they don't need to worry about it. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about some of the well-architected practices. This is actually a pretty recent heavy focus for us on our team, and something that we're looking to develop out more, automate, and kind of push for more. So well-architected is comprised of these 6 different pillars. I won't go through all of them, and sustainability is actually a new one that was presented out at reInvent, which I'm pretty excited about. But all of these have different questions associated with them when you go through the AWS well-architected review process. So it could be things like, you know, how do you encrypt your data at rest or at transit? How are you monitoring your cost? How are you handling your cloud tech debt? So these questions kind of encompass these 6 pillars. And we're trying to standardize and streamline a process for our teams to go through this well-architected review process. So that's kind of one of the things that my team's working on, and SAM is really useful in developing these golden paths, and the SAM skeleton project really helps us out because you can kind of already answer some of these questions up front and code and develop for these things off the bat. So that's one area where SAM also can kind of help us out and gets everyone to a baseline that is something we're building up to for best practices. So I'm almost done. I have one more slide. I just want to talk a little bit about the future state for SAM, going forward. I mentioned before, we offer our SAM skeleton pattern and we give you a Python Lambda out of the box. We have talked about also doing a TypeScript offering. We found that a lot of our developers lean towards TypeScript, and I would be curious if we have more of an interest if we offered a TypeScript Lambda out of the box. Kind of going along with that, I'd love to encourage more SAM pattern development coming from the community. Again, we don't want to dictate this. If this is something that folks aren't using a ton of, we'll kind of lay off a little bit. But if it has a lot of interest and folks are looking to use it, maybe they just don't have the right pattern out there or the right setup and architecture for them. We definitely want to see where this is coming from and how we can further support kind of more SAM development and encourage it in the community. And I've alluded to the last one a couple of times, SAM, CFD, CDK. At the end of the day, I don't really care what you use. We really try to leave this up to developer preference, and we want to continue to enable all 3 of these moving forward. One of the cool things about SAM too is the CLI commands are also supported with CDK projects. So they're kind of friends now and they work together instead of being kind of competing platforms. So we really leave this up to the developer. And we just want to kind of continue enabling serverless development for all of our developers. That's it. That's all I have tonight. Hopefully this was valuable for you. I have put up my Twitter handle here and my LinkedIn. Feel free to reach out to me. I'm pretty active on both. And then Chris, I know you're dying to hear my question, right? Is that what you want?
Well, no, not necessarily. We've got time for Q&A before we get to the question.
Yeah, we've definitely Q&A.
We've got a survey to send out.
Yep. Feel free. Definitely happy to answer any questions. Feel free to reach out. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I've got a couple of questions that are sort of related. I used to be a big CloudFormation proponent, and then I drank the Terraform Kool-Aid, and I noticed that that's sort of, not listed there, and that's somewhat interesting, and there might be a question in there. But I'm also thinking about how you do sort of aggregation, and that one of the real advantages I find of Terraform over CloudFormation is just it's designed from a modular point of view, and it's designed to say, yes, team A has a thing and team B has a thing, and we can just have a main that covers both of them. And CloudFormation sort of missed the boat on that, and I'm wondering if you can talk about how SAM does that kind of thing.
Sure. So to kind of answer like your first question there, like I said, we try to get our kind of tools that we support are like the buy-in from the developers. So like we really point to the community and say like, what are you guys doing? What are you guys excited about? What are you folks using? And it's just, combined with when we started getting into the cloud space, AWS was the thing that just bubbled up to the top. And that's where we focused a lot of our time, a lot of our energy, and a lot of our efforts. So today it's just the thing that is most mature in the department. There's the most knowledge there. There's the most understanding. There's the most support for that. So that's kind of why the AWS specific tools like SAM and CDK have kind of surfaced up to the top, and we're not using things as much as Terraform. That doesn't mean that we don't approve of it or that we don't think it's the best practice. we're definitely open to people using that, and we'd definitely be happy to support those things. We're just gravitating towards kind of what our user base wants us to focus on and what the need is. So we have tons of different channels of community collaboration. I mean, we have Slack spaces, we have Team spaces, we have Stack Overflow. So we kind of just address the questions that are coming up through that. And then additionally, we do feedback meetings with a lot of our, I'd say, serverless super users to get some of that feedback and to kind of point us in the right direction. So it's definitely something we're open to, but not something that we've seen a lot of development in.
And I'll add to that, Brian. In your example in the question, it was team A has something and team B has something, and there needs to be a main. Something Liberty's done a lot of has been trying to build app teams around products. And so individual app teams are really owning their products out the door and owning that holistic part and trying to eliminate these cross-team dependencies and things like that. So organizational structure will also contribute to the tooling you need to successfully deploy to your AWS accounts. And so that's something that I've observed. The teams that are using Terraform are typically structured differently than some of the teams using something like SAM and hitting the ground running really fast.
There's one of those organizational principles that says your software will mimic your I don't remember which rule that is, but if you have 3 offices, you'll have a 3-part software architecture.
Yeah, and I kind of, it's funny because we're kind of split up in the markets, and I would work for what you'd call probably like a central IT in a way. So part of my job is getting all of these folks on the same page a little bit so that we can reuse things across department and it's not too much of a headache. So we see a lot of like almost what I'd call serverless silos pop up here and there with folks doing serverless differently, or telling their departments one thing and another department's telling their department another thing, or they build out a tool that could be useful for someone else. So we're trying to kind of identify where all these silos are and say like, hey, we want to continue encouraging you guys to build out what you need, and but let's try to stay on the same page and see if we can help everyone too. And the other part I hit on is we're talking a lot about our more advanced serverless users and maybe some people just getting into the cloud, but with 5,000 employees, you have people that are really, really mature in serverless and they know exactly what they want to use, and something gets announced on Friday and they want it available to them to use at the enterprise level on Monday. But we also have teams that are nowhere near the cloud. We're 109 years old, so there's a lot of legacy out there. There's a lot of stuff that's still being supported that needs to be supported. So we kind of have this large gap and this spread of people that we need to support, and we need to help everybody from the beginner cloud user to the advanced serverless user.
Christy, question for you around SAM. My first introduction to SAM was when I wanted to make a contribution to the serverless application repo, the SAR in the AWS console. At the time, I don't know if it still is, the only way to do that was to have a SAM template that's uploaded and shared. Small tangent, during that project, I had to Google SAM and IAM, which comes out to be SAM IAM, which put me down a Dr. Seuss rabbit hole. But irrelevant. When I was getting started with SAM and looking at the serverless application repository, I thought, oh, this makes a lot of sense for sharing reusable stacks that might need to be deployed. Can you talk about, did a company like Liberty evaluate anything like that to host central patterns in an effort for reuse? Or was there a reason that maybe a tool like that wasn't suited for a company like Liberty?
Yeah, so good question. I actually don't know where we stand right now with the serverless application repository. I do know that, the process to add a service from AWS to an allow list is complicated and it's long, and it goes through a lot of cybersecurity checks that I'm not aware of. But I do know that there's a lot of things out there that, little things from AWS offerings that we won't kind of green light going forward, which I think is really why part of the reason why some of these things like the marketplace and we have a few other developer catalogs have kind of popped up. I'm not actually sure where that stands right now though in terms of our services. It'd be something to revisit for sure, or to investigate a little further.
Awesome, thanks. Just a reminder, folks, please fill out the survey that both Chris and Brian have shared in the chat. And if anyone has any questions, feel free to drop them in chat or come off mute. Otherwise, we might be able to transition over to the much anticipated.
Actually, I have one question myself. Yeah, hey, it's Soon here again. I just have one question. Since we've been discussing serverless and the like, is there by any chance a concern at Liberty Mutual in regards to, say, vendor lock-in? Because you mentioned that, oh, we're exploring other cloud platforms, and the way how SAM and at least that works is that's very specific to AWS. So like, or is the approach for, say, Liberty to be, oh, we'll use a cloud provider for a specific use case, like, oh, we like Google Cloud's AI capabilities, we'll use that for that. We like Microsoft's lift and shift for some legacy Windows type applications there, and AWS for everything else, or case by case basis. I'm curious about the philosophy there.
Yeah, I'd say it's definitely more of the latter. We're just more mature in AWS because it's the first thing that we jumped into, and we found that it's kind of it covers a lot of things pretty well. But you know, we've had some arguments a little bit about, well, should we be the AWS serverless team? Like, should we just be the serverless team? But we actually do have cloud provider teams specific to Azure and GCP, so they are cloud providers that we are bringing in and supporting. We're just not like quite there yet. We actually do like a, I don't know, quarterly check-in or so with our Azure and our GCP teams to kind of be like, hey, you know, where are you guys at with serverless? Are you starting to see some folks using Azure Functions or, you know, some of your other serverless offerings? And they're just not there yet for enablement purposes. We're still trying to get off the ground with some of those things. So not that concerned with vendor lock-in. I am curious to see like kind of where the future goes with supporting other platforms though.
I have a question, Christy.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for great talk, by the way. I'm really interested in hearing your from your experience, like what's the difference between like a very mature serverless app that a team's been working on for maybe months or years, and versus the ones that maybe like just start up and you know they're just getting going? Do you see differences in like maybe the greenfield versus the mature one?
Sure. So I can't speak too much to what the architecture looks like because it's so spread out and so different depending on what area of the organization you're in. And since we focus more on enabling some of the services and the tools, I don't actually see every single app that's out there in building serverless. I'd say kind of some of the differences I'm really seeing though is, you know, somebody who's really advanced in using serverless a lot, they're building out all of their applications in serverless. You know, they already have a great understanding of CFT, of SAM, of CDK. And they really are the ones that want, like, as I mentioned, you know, something gets announced on Friday. It's one of the big things that we're working with right now, as an example, CDK v2. Like, the people that are really into serverless are like, I want this like tomorrow. Like, can you get this set up for this? You know, they're all excited about it. They're talking about it. They're asking us, they're harassing us about it. So they're like kind of more empowered users. And they're directing us to what tools to support and to use and to put our priority into. I'd say teams that are like newer, one of the biggest pain points we're running into, and one of the things that's kind of clear is with these starter patterns and these golden paths in this marketplace, our advanced users can take one of those starter patterns and they're off and running and they're good to go. Some of our more newer users or folks that aren't that familiar with the cloud are taking those, deploying it, and then we're getting a message like, hey, I don't know what to do now. Like, this is awesome. I have a Lambda function, but like, I need this, this, and this. And like, I need my application to do this thing, but like, I have no idea where to go from here. So it's kind of that day two development gap is like a lot of what we're seeing in terms of education and understanding of the cloud. So hopefully that kind of answers your question.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, it's a great explanation. It sounds like you're seeing a lot of differences, not necessarily in the technology patterns, maybe some, but really the differences in like maybe people and how they're approaching the project, if I understood that correctly. And which I guess maybe if no one else has another question, I actually have a follow-up question if I can, Christy.
Yeah.
So like, how do you see a difference between like how the mature teams maybe explain to Liberty Mutual's business side, like why they choose this stack versus like the greenfield teams? Like, have you gotten into like those type of dialogues about how they justify their stack?
Not too much. Like I said, I don't get to be as day to day with like the developers and how they're building stuff out. We actually just started like consulting one-on-one with a team, which is the first time we've ever done something like that. So I'm not quite sure how those discussions are going. I will say for sure though that, the business side is really sold on this idea of serverless, and we're really pushing for a serverless first initiative, where, we recognize that serverless might not be the right solution for everyone, and it's not a one size fits all. Majority maybe, but we're really trying to embrace this idea of pursuing serverless first. And our business side is very on board with, like, it's cost effective, it's performance efficient, it's all these things. But as I alluded to in the beginning, Lambda was announced 7 years ago or so, and I think a lot of people just had it in their head that Lambda is serverless, and we're just trying to change the mindset of like, hey, that's not the case. You need to think of things in event-driven architecture, and then kind of going back to the business and saying, well, we need this ramp up period to help those developers on that day two development. Like, yes, it's really easy to get started, and yes, this is an optimal solution, but we also need to set aside the time to learn about which services and tools work best for our use cases and optimize our architectures for serverless and cloud development.
Just to build on that, as an engineer at Liberty who does, build applications on a day-to-day, our business partners at Liberty aren't coming to us and saying, what is your technology stack? They're coming and saying, this is the business problem. How can you as the IT team help us solve that? And so we get to pick the solution that is right for the job. And when we have folks like Christy and other teams making it really easy to pick serverless or to pick a reusable pattern, we can accelerate so much faster, and our business sees those results and trust their engineers a little bit more. So the next time that they come to them with a problem, we're not talking about technology, we're talking about solution. So again, I plugged at the beginning, Liberty is a phenomenal place to work if you're an engineer that loves a collaborative environment with business partners, because we do have that type of relationship. Come to us with a problem and we'll provide a solution.
Cool. I've got another question. Given that the focus on reuse that you have, but also guardrails, where are you in terms of code reviews? And do you have any styles, rules, tools? Because this is something my company is also trying to grow the maturity ladder on.
You're barking up the right tree, because I actually have another talk that is all about clean code, and there's a whole section about how we approach pull requests and code reviews on my team. It's definitely different across the organization, right? We leave it we're agile. We leave it up to teams to determine their team norms and their developer working agreements and how they choose to work. I like to think that my team's pretty robust. We try to follow a basic branching strategy. And then, the thing that I like to push is like use code reviews as a learning tool. No questions too silly or too small or too stupid to ask. I obviously learned serverless on the job. There's not much in academics that are teaching serverless and cloud technology right now. And those, I can attribute a lot of that to the pull requests and just promoting discussions through them. We have a rule to like not take things too personally either. We definitely add memes to our pull requests sometimes to kind of keep it light and fun. So I'd highly recommend that. And then, we take things offline as we see fit. But yeah, it really depends on the team. It really depends on where you fall in the organization. It really depends on your emphasis on code reviews. Like I said, with 5,000 developers, it's really hard to keep a pulse on everyone and where they're at. But I have seen some pretty good practices coming with pull requests. And with that, there's a lot of, especially in my department, we have to interact a lot with our CI/CD tool teams. We interact a lot with our AWS platform team. So we do a lot of cross-team collaboration, and we try to adopt this best styles for pull requests into other teams' projects as well.
Okay, yeah, that's cool. I will say I used to use a tool called Smart Bear that would flag a review that was too quick to be believable. So it's like, there is a 1,000-line change and the person approved it after 30 seconds. It's like, no, that doesn't count. But I haven't seen a good tool that encourages that lately, I guess.
Yeah, I haven't used too many tools, I would say, other than, just our vendor for doing pull requests. I haven't used too many like external things. I know we have like automated code reviewers that will add everybody to the team automatically to a pull request depending on what files you change, which is kind of cool. And we have, inline change capabilities, but I haven't used anything that's actually doing like automated checks like that.
Yeah, I will say we've added, we started to have the notion of code owners. So, we have, this doesn't give anything away. I mean, we have, common Terraform modules that everyone uses. And if you change that, someone from the architecture team has to sign off on it. So, and there's a question in the chat, how much of telemetry logging and industry patterns thereof are part of the starter template?
Sure. So again, this kind of depends on what the template is or the pattern is. We don't actually have, we have a standard process for contributing. We don't do too many kind of checks on patterns as they're being contributed. I know that from one of our developer catalogs, a lot of them, you'll actually get like a threat model diagram out of the box for you, which is pretty cool. We try to push for like really robust readmes and things. And yeah, like all of these patterns are going to have to be created to kind of be within the lines of our security checks. We really let the developers kind of come together and source these patterns though. And kind of alongside with that, we let them rate them too. So we can see, what the highest ones are and what features are being supported and all of those things too. So we tend to kind of defer to the developer, and a lot of that is purposeful because we want to empower our developers to, again, like show us what they're using most, show us what they care about. What do you like about this pattern? I think one of our highest ones is like a CDK TypeScript pattern, and it's got a couple thousand instances used. So it's like we can use some of those things to model and say like, okay, what is this project using that our developers really like or want or need? So I think we try to bake in as much as we can in terms of logging and things, but you also don't want to be too opinionated because you want it to be useful for a lot of different teams. And as you can imagine, certain teams, certain departments, they kind of end up with the way that they like to do things. And part of my job is to make sure that it's kind of a way that everyone likes to do things, and it's not too opinionated and specific to a certain group of a couple hundred people. So we try to add as much as we can in there. I know my team also collects a lot of metrics that we share out to our group too.
Okay, maybe we could do the trivia question prize and then see if there's another question. And for folks who are new to this, what we do is we ask the trivia question, and then the first one who answers it in the Slack. And since Christy's going to be asking the question, she'll be the one who tells us whether we got it right. And the prize is one of our Boston AWS meetup mugs. I'm currently not able to ship those outside the US, though we could probably work something out. So, where you go, Christy.
Great. So my question, hopefully it's not too hard. If it is, I'll come up with another one. At the beginning, I mentioned how many Lambda functions we have running in our accounts. Does anyone remember how many Lambda functions it was?
I do, but I don't count.
Oh, immediate. That was too easy. Wow. Thought I was really gonna get somebody with that.
Boom. All right. So Sandesh, if you would, if you're in the Slack channel, or either DM us your email address or send it to us in the Slack channel.
And actually, postal address would be great.
That was almost too. That was very wow. Didn't even have to struggle.
I thought
with
I was
that
going
one.
to catch somebody there. I was like, oh, this is really obscure. This is immediate. Okay. Well, I guess you were
2
paying
weeks ago-
attention. I should be happy, right?
Well, then I'm going to toss out another trivia question, and we'll go for a second mug. And this is just because of it. It has nothing to do with serverless. It's just a stat I saw about International Women's Day, and so the question is, what in our field, in the tech field, what % of the time with equally skilled candidates, what % of the time does a female candidate get a lower salary offer than a male candidate? And I'm going to ask within 5%. Not quite. Keep guessing. I know it is sad. No. 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 I'll say higher than the last guess.
Higher in the right direction or higher in the wrong direction?
Go higher. Yes, Eric. It's actually 58% of the time.
Man.
So
That's somewhat more encouraging than I thought it might be, but it's still.
yeah, it's horrifying. It's horrifying, yes. But Eric, send me your postal address and I'll send you one of our mugs.
Cool.
Yes. Any other questions for our speaker?
I think
Okay.
of something later, you can reach out to me too. Totally fine.
Okay, so we'll post the survey result, the demographic survey result we did, and we'll post the recording of this in our Slack. Our next meeting will be 2 weeks from Thursday. We're going to get back on our 2-week cadence. But thank you so much, everyone, for coming. Thank you, Christy. This was really, really interesting. Glory to Ukraine.
Did you stop recording? Tell me you stopped recording. Christy, thanks so much for coming on. This was